Hey guys, welcome. Thank you all for coming to our CEU here at Verbal Beginnings. To all of our online people, thank you for tuning in. We're using a new platform this time, so all of the attendance is automated. No more sign in, sign out polls, nothing like that. So yes, all very happy about that. We are doing attendance automatically and cannot provide any technical support during the talk. So if you're having problems with your client crashing, the polls not popping up when you see that there's a poll queue on the slides, anything like that, I'm not going to be a great resource for you, but you can go to zoom.us and contact their support desk to get some help with that if you need any live support during the event. So a little bit about Verbal Beginnings. We are an ABA company. We're based in Columbia, Maryland. We just celebrated our 8th anniversary, and dissemination is one of our core values that we're really serious about being able to promote within our company culture and out to the world. So broadcasting these CEUs live is a big part of that dissemination value, and we're excited we can have you guys all here for it. Let's see. So after the presentation, I'll be sending a copy of the slide deck, a copy of the recording, a feedback form, and all those kind of references out via email to anyone who signed in with that Google form originally at the start of the process. So if any of you guys here in person have joined kind of ad hoc, just shoot me an email so that I know that you're here and that you want to get all of those recordings and everything. Our family is expanding. We have been able to bring on so many new programs and new people in the last year here, and it's just really exciting. So this is a new building as of April 1st. If anyone online lives in Maryland and would like to come have a tour, you can contact me and I'd love to show you around. We have our diagnostic evaluation service that runs out of here, as well as our early intervention services, our feeding therapy services, and our social skills. And then we also have a huge in-home service program that we offer all over Maryland, DC, Virginia. We've got a team in Delaware, an awesome team on the Eastern Shore in Maryland, and a team in Pittsburgh. So there's a lot of opportunities, and there's just a lot of ways that we want to spread ABA to everybody. So come see us at conferences, contact me if you want to collaborate, if you want to give me ideas for what you'd like to see presentations on, anything like that. Rebecca Larson has been with us for a few years now, and she's going to present about the ethics of self-care.
All right, welcome guys. So just for the CEU introduction and overview, my name is Rebecca. I know a lot of you on this half of the room, some of you over here. I'm a clinical supervisor at the center. So my clinical work, it's early intervention, autism services, but that's not what I'm talking to you about today. And I also want to make it clear before I start kind of from what position I'm speaking to you. I'm not speaking to you as somebody who is never stressed, who has achieved enlightenment, has figured it all out. Like, I'm a behavior analyst that struggles to find that appropriate balance of work and of life. But I'm also somebody who's always had an interest in mindfulness and meditation. And there's this huge part of my life that's behavior analysis. So what this presentation is it's a marriage of those ideas, and if not a marriage, at least it's a space where maybe they could exist together, that we could look at them through the lens of a behavior analyst. So a little of the overview. We'll go into what is this. So we'll talk about anxiety, and we'll talk about mindfulness and what you might make of that as a behavior analyst. And we'll review why you should care. And this is where you'll get that one ethics CE is we'll look at our ethical code and see if there's a connection, if the BACB also wants to take care of ourselves. And then we'll look into, does this stuff work? A review of the research from both behavior analytic methodologies and also outside of that. And then last, we have some practical applications. A big also inspiration for this CEU is just that, being a behavior analyst, you don't live in a world where you're isolated from being overworked, from being busy, from being stressed out, but too often we turn outside of our science to solve those issues, which, if you think about it, is kind of crazy. I listened to this podcast recently. I think it was Tarbuck talking. He viewed overworking as a problem behavior that often gains access to reinforcement because you work yourself to death and then you get promoted, or you work really hard and then you get a bonus, which is good, right? We want reinforcement, but too often that reinforces being super overworked. So what I want to assert to you guys is there are ways in which we can gain access to reinforcement in perhaps a more effective and healthier manner, and ways that you yourself can work towards change on the individual and on the group level. So I'll speak to you about a lot of terms that might feel uncomfortable as a behavior analyst, even like looking at this term or this definition. And I want you to just have an open mind about that. So diving into it. In the first part of the research or of this presentation, I'll talk to you more about anxiety than about stress, because there was a little bit more research on that and it was easier for me to connect that to behavior analysis. But really those things are similar, right? Stress, anxiety, physically, you might feel muscle tension, gastrointestinal distress, erratic breathing, irregular pulse, poor sleep. Emotionally, it might be uneasiness, agitation, distraction, panic, feeling overwhelmed. Thoughts could be racing, repetitive, obsessive, catastrophizing. And last, physiologically, anxiety and stress are this sympathetic nervous system overactivation, and both are associated with the release of cortisol. And when I think about it, I think about stress as this like singular event, like you have a big presentation that's you're gonna give, like this one. But then the presentation ends and then the stress is over, right? These symptoms you don't experience anymore. And anxiety it's prolonged, right? So events come and go, but you feel a lot of these symptoms regularly. And personal opinion, I think that a lot of us in this society, in this culture, and even a lot of us as behavior analysts, I think we exist with this baseline level of anxiety and we don't really address it. So just going more, the actual prevalence of anxiety disorders is between 10 and 28%. So that's when you look it up. But this term, it's historically pretty abstract. The etymology of the term refers to this like choking sensation for anxiety. And the DSM-5 uses anxiety disorders as this big umbrella term where you think that has specific phobias, right? Like social anxiety, and it also has these generalized terms of generalized anxiety disorder. So trying to think about it as a behavior analyst, avoidance plays a role in this, right? Avoidance must play a role in anxiety, but a lot of the research on the topic is based on these cognitive and associative learning processes. So, private events. I just talked about a lot of things that behavior analysts don't talk about, right? Like thoughts, emotions, feelings. So I wanted to take a second and address that and address private events. A definition for them are behavioral phenomena that are observable, if at all, only to the behaving organism. So a lot of those things I just talked about of your thoughts, how they might be, your emotions, even these physiological symptoms that you can't necessarily measure very well. And obviously, IOA for something like a private event is impossible per the definition. And I think that's why a lot of behavior analysts don't even touch it and stay away from it. But when we look at Skinner, we know this, right? He acknowledged that private events are a real thing, but the behavior change effort should focus on manipulating environmental conditions. And we should avoid constructing theoretical accounts of private events to explain these observable behavior. But we know, being behaving organisms ourselves, private events are important to us, right? Like my own private events are pretty important to me. And they appear to have some control over other behavioral events. I found this really cool article from Palmer where he addressed that, many of nature's phenomenons lie outside of our ability to measure, control, and observe, but scientists still interpret that phenomenon. And he gave this great example of the planet Neptune, that it can't be seen by the naked eye. And so it was private until the 1840s when astronomers could first see it with telescopes. But the existence of Neptune had been inferred for decades because of what they'd observed as, I'll just say, our irregularities in another planet. So if you think about that, these astronomers, these scientists, something that we consider this real hard science, they have this choice of like, do I trust that there's something that I can't see, but science is telling me is there? Or do I doubt my observation? Do I abandon the assumption of uniformity? Do I discard celestial mechanics? No, they believed that it was there. And I think that we can draw a parallel between maybe what we should do as behavior analysts. Like, no, we can't see it. And maybe we can't measure that. But this quote was so great. I had to put the whole thing in there. It's private events play no role in the experimental analysis of behavior, but they play an important role in the interpretation of behavior outside the laboratory. And if we don't engage in such interpretive exercises, then we have no explanation for much of human behavior. And then we leave this vacuum to be filled with folk psychology and its derivatives, right? So if we don't address it, somebody else will, and perhaps with less scientific basis. Let's keep going. So I looked at it. So is it respondent conditioning? Can that explain what anxiety is? There was a cool study that it was a warning signal, this like lighter tone preceded an unconditioned stimulus, which was an electric shock, unless an avoidance response occurs, right? So this light goes off, you're gonna get shocked unless you engage in an avoidance response. So yeah, maybe that could explain some of anxiety, but what about when someone is anxious about something that has never happened to them before? And big examples of that are like a fear of dying, a fear of heights. You know, if you've never actually experienced like falling off of a cliff, some of these anxieties really can't be explained through respondent conditioning, right? It necessitates prior traumatic conditioning. Additionally, not everybody who experiences trauma develops a behavioral disorder. So there's more to it than just that. Then we go to operant conditioning. Is it just negative reinforcement? A behavior that leads to the prevention or the removal of an aversive stimulus. And for that, there was this cool study where they looked at the presentation of CO2 enriched air, which was really interesting. So they didn't use an electric shock because it was done in humans and you could not provide a human with an electric shock. But CO2, brief presentations of this concentrated CO2 air is associated with a lot of the different effects that anxiety present, so like an elevated heart rate and like ratings of unpleasantness, which as I was reading that, I'm not sure who actually agreed to be in this study and feel terrible, but someone did, thankfully. So CO2 was delivered every 3 seconds unless the participant engaged in an avoidance response, which was like pulling a plunger, which resulted in a 10-second delay of that CO2 enriched air. And they saw from that stable responding in the contingent and the non-contingent condition, AKA these presentations of CO2 was indeed an aversive event, and people engaged in avoidance responding because of that. But I knew this wasn't the full picture of what was going on, so I knew I had to dive more into RFT because the majority of recent research on human avoidance has been conducted by researchers interested in these derived relational responding. And its relevance to understanding behavioral disorders. So this slide is just a brief review of RFT, a simple topic. So we know that when a relation between A and B is taught, and a relation between B and C is taught, that with verbally able humans, it's likely that we're gonna see a lot of these other relations emerge, which are symmetry, transitivity, and equivalence. And we know that neither A or C have a history of differential reinforcement, so neither one should control the selection of the other. And it's not generalization. The stimuli are physically dissimilar. So this is what we know about RFT. And I'll go into a little bit more into examples of this, but cute graphic to explain RFT, which I thought was pretty helpful as a reminder of something that I think most behavior analysts really only encounter, at least maybe in this room, only encounter when you're like studying for boards. So from RFT, I got to the transformation of stimulus function. So really, you can train a particular behavioral function for one member of a derived relation, and then observe that function emerge for one or more additional members of that derived relation without further training. And those are a lot of words that might not make sense. So I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna give you one piece of information. This is from Blackledge 2003. This is the only piece of information that I'm giving you. And then I'll ask a question. Say it out loud. No, right, but how do you know that? Do you know the definition of this word? No, you know it because you understand the relationship, which is really cool. By only knowing the relation, not the definition, the function can change. And another way to think about that is, so say somebody has a phobia of snakes. And when they think about or hear the word snake, then they experience this like alarm response. So the word snake functions as a conditioned stimulus for fear and an SD for avoidance. So if that's the situation that we're dealing with, it's also really likely, because of these derived relations, that other stimuli that participate in equivalence relations with the word snake are also going to acquire similar functions. So the word reptile, the pictures of snakes. A real snake in the actual place or places where snakes might be found are also likely going to function as a CS for fear and an SD for avoidance, right? So I thought it was really cool as a behavior analyst to see that there are some accounts of what anxiety might be, and we can explain it, which is really just empowering for me. So let's take a left turn here into mindfulness, meditation, and breathing techniques. So mindfulness training teaches participants meditation techniques that increase their awareness of present moment experiences, including thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations, with a gentle and accepting attitude towards oneself. Right? We hate that definition. That's terrible. So I want to give you a behavior analytic perspective on what it could be. And this comes from me exploring the literature and also my own personal practice of these, is that we can view mindfulness, meditation, and breathing as an alternative behavior that you can engage in. So I actually have an example of this that happened to me. Whew, I'm sweating, guys. It's really hot in here, Diana. Recently, about a month ago, I was flying on a plane and I was flying over the Atlantic Ocean. So for me, that's scarier, right? Like when you're over a body of water versus like in the land, which makes no sense because either would be terrible. But I'm flying over the Atlantic Ocean and then the plane gets a bunch of turbulence. And so much so that like people are gasping and small objects are flying into the air. Like my phone flew up and it came back down and I caught it between my thighs. And I had this moment of like, and right, so what's the behavior that a lot of people engage in then? They're private events. They're like, this plane is gonna crash. I am gonna die. It's gonna be really sad not to see the people that I love. Haven't even paid off my student loans yet. Like, we engage in a lot of these thoughts, these private events. And what I did, and it sounds so simple that it's laughable, but I took a deep breath. And then I took another one. And then I engaged in my own practice of mindful meditation, which is just like drawing all of my focus to my own body and what's happening and how I feel. And what that did for me was after a few minutes, the turbulence is over and I'm calm, which after a few minutes, I'm going to give you like a hypothesis of what might have happened because I've been in the situation before. If I let myself go into these like private events, doomsday, catastrophizing scenario, after the turbulence is gone, I'm still up. I'm still freaked out. My heartbeat, these physiological symptoms of anxiety, I feel them. So in my own practice, I think mindfulness and meditation, and again, this is a personal assertion, that it helps me return to baseline levels more quickly. It doesn't make it so that it never happens, but it helps me return to baseline more quickly. And that's also a way that mindfulness and meditation and behavior analysis are similar, is that it takes practice, right? You can't just jump into it. It's not a quick fix, how often do we tell our families that, well, yeah, I'm not going to solve it in just overnight. You have to continue to implement this behavior plan. You have to implement it with fidelity, and then you're actually going to experience the results. So similar, right? It takes time, continued effort, small incremental efforts towards this big terminal goal. And also likely, if you do not have any practice of this, if you don't have mindfulness meditation as something that you do right now, if you go and try to apply it into the most stressful situation of your life, it's probably not going to work. And we know this as behavior analysts, right? You haven't tried it in less stressful situations. You haven't tried it under optimum conditions, right? You need to learn the behavior first, and then it's something that you can apply to other areas of your life. Okay, mindfulness. So I'm going to compare Buddhism and radical behaviorism. And the reason why for Buddhism is a lot of our mindfulness practices come out of that. So first, both are interested in shaping the behavior of individual participants. They both are looking for change. They both attempt to increase or decrease the likelihood of future behaviors, right? Like that's what we do. And Buddhism, the root of mindfulness, that's what it's looking to do as well. Both also consider the notion as self as not separate from the environment, and therefore there's this relationship between the environment and the individual. Right, so radical behaviorism, we want to focus on environmental contingencies to create behavior change, but Buddhism, it applies the science-like framework in which it gives this set of principles to achieve certain goals. So there's a similarity there in how we consider the self and the environment. And both strive to promote improvement within the world through understanding of their foundational practices. So Buddhism focuses on the enhancement of human condition through mindfulness, which is going to promote encountering others with compassion and understanding. But radical behaviorism, think like Skinner's radical behaviorism, think Walden too, right? It's applying these foundational principles of science at the level of the individual, but also at the level of the community to go about promoting change. So they're not the same thing. Then this is really the slide of how they might be similar, but maybe that provides a little bit of a cliff for you to think about jumping off of. So in this, I found this really great book. Actually, I was forced to read this book in two different places. One, so I'm a behavior analyst, but I also teach yoga. So in my advanced yoga teacher training, this book by Hansen, it's called The Neuroscience of Wisdom, Happiness, and Love, right? So it's written by this neuroscientist. I had to read it in that. And then now in a doctoral class about mindfulness interventions in ABA, I was also forced to read this book, which is pretty amazing and cool. But so this book, it describes that your brain has this negativity bias. So humans of a species have survived because of an ability to avoid dangers that would have resulted in death and approach opportunities that sustain life, approaching and avoiding. But the human brain has this negativity bias because it's more important often to avoid than to approach, just for survival, right? And you can think about this as a way of like, think about an ancient human walking around the earth. If you miss one apple tree, like there's probably gonna be another, or even just another opportunity, like a carrot over there, or you're gonna get this animal and eat that. Like there's gonna be another opportunity to approach. But if you miss that opportunity to avoid this hungry tiger that's trying to eat you, then you're dead, right? Like there is no more opportunities at all, which is blunt, but like avoiding is more important than approaching. And I'm telling you all this to understand, like, why do we get stuck and why is it so difficult to engage in these practices of mindfulness and like even happiness? So this negativity bias, it causes suffering, right? So the brain, it preferentially scans for, registers, stores, reacts, and recalls unpleasant experiences. They're gonna be bigger in your brain. And this is from a neuroscientist who, that's what he studies. Another really cool thing that he brought up in the section of the book is how your mind can influence your brain. Like the way that you use your mind can change the structures of your brain, which again, I know this is a room of behavior analysts, but stick with me. They looked at a study of taxi drivers in London who like navigate these super winding streets, and then they looked at their brains and they had enlarged a large hippocampus, which is this like visual spatial part of your brain. It was enlarged for these taxi drivers. So the way that they use their mind on a daily basis changed the physical structure of their brain. And there's a lot of studies. I don't go into them in this CEU, but there are a lot of studies to validate that for mindfulness and for meditation, that it changes the physical structure of your brain. We also know as you become a happier person, the left frontal region of your brain becomes more active, right? So there's something to the way that you're using your brain. What flows through your mind can sculpt your brain. And I say this to you to provide you this like basis of when we look at these studies, like what might be happening, and also to say, hey, the things that are happening right now don't have to be the things that happen for me in my brain all of the time for my entire life. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the nervous system in mindfulness, which is also largely from that Hansen book. So he calls suffering the embodiment of physical and mental discomfort through constant activation of our sympathetic nervous system sympathetic nervous system. So that's what I'm talking about, this, how I think we're all like in a society, like experiencing this baseline level of anxiety that doesn't go away. I think we're experiencing a lot of SNS, which is this like flight or fight, which was needed. It was needed for the ancient humans when avoiding was much more important than approaching. But now in our modern world, I don't think it's quite as needed, right? For some situations, sure, but not all of the time. So chronic activation of SNS can create physical and mental health problems. So parasympathetic nervous system activation, this is that like, I am safe, I am calm, I am home. So it's the opposite, right? SNS is ramping up, I'm gonna run or I'm gonna fight. PNS is I am safe right now. But what's really cool is that mindfulness can help reduce this automatic responding. And consequently, it's a conscious choice to guide behavior. And when I looked at a lot of this research, I ended up looking at a bunch of research about diaphragmatic breathing or deep breathing. Here it says meditation and directing attention towards bodily sensations can activate this PNS. So it's like, how do I stop feeling like, so crazy? And how can I get into, I am fine, and I'm doing it right there. There's a lot of research to support that it's directing your attention to your body and these deep breathing exercises. So specifically, diaphragmatic breathing, several studies called it essentially a beneficial, low-cost, low-risk intervention to treat so many different things: stress, anxiety, depression, PTSD, stress-related medical illnesses, rehabilitation of criminal offenders, substance abuse, so much. Like, they literally just had these people breathe deeply and things changed for them. Other studies too, diaphragmatic breathing, like taking a deep breath, improved cognitive performance, reduction of negative subjective and objective measures of stress in healthy adults. So subjective would be like, I feel better. Objective is like reduced levels of cortisol. So just a little bit of research to set you up as we begin to look at research studies. What might be happening to make these studies be effective? Okay, so now we've gotten to the point of the presentation where I stopped talking for a moment. So there should be, and if there's not, we'll need to find them, or somebody needs to pull it up on their computer, a copy of the BACB's Ethical and Compliance Code. It's not the surveys there. Those are for later.
Yeah, we weren't able to get those.
Oh, so people who are here physically, if you could just pull it up. I mean, we all have access to it. Pull up the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code. If you're at home, you were given a link with that in it. And I want to give you guys 10 minutes. So if you're at home, it's just going to be independent work. And I want you to find 5 areas of this code that you think could apply to self-care. And some of it's loose, but identify 5 areas. And if you're at your table, like talk to each other, or even break into small groups for this bigger table here, and generate a list together of 5 areas of our code that could apply to self-care. All right, guys. So let's bring it back now. I'm not going to have you guys specifically share which ones you identified, but I'm going to tell you guys some ones that I think really apply, and we'll also have some polls, some like ethics polls. So these polls, people who are here physically, I'm not going to ask you to answer these. The people online are going to answer them for us, because some of them are kind of personal questions that you might not want to be personally identified as answering in a certain way. So people online, there is a scale, I believe, yes, from never to always. And that's that question is, have you ever felt like it was difficult to give your best quality of work because of personal stressors outside of work? And you guys might already know where I'm going with this, having just looked at the code. It looks like we'll just give them maybe like a minute to respond. But so far, the highest column at around like 70% right now is occasionally, 1% at never, 13% at rarely, and 16% at very frequently. So the biggest population is occasionally to very frequently. People feel like it's difficult to give their best work because of personal stressors outside of work. And that makes sense, right? Because what's going on in our lives matter. But yeah, final poll, 70% at occasionally. So why should you care? Because you need to be able to do our best work. And I think this field in particular, like that's something that we care about. You don't, in my opinion, you don't decide to be a behavior analyst because, you know, you just like looking at graphs. Like there is an element of people and doing your best. And of really like changing lives, right? So we need to be able to do our best work. And I think that relates most clearly to responsible conduct for behavior analysts. So in the integrity, behavior analysts follow through on obligations and contractual and professional commitments with a high quality of work and refrain from making professional commitments that they cannot keep, right? Like we have to be aware of how much is on our plate. Another poll. It has a particular client, job, or circumstance interfered with your ability to do your best work. So not something personal, not something outside of work, but a situation going on at work. So letting our online people be our sample. Oh yeah, you can't see that. It looks like we have about 1% at never, 1% at always, around 20% at rarely, 55 at occasionally, and 23 at very frequently. So we're looking at, again, most people are answering occasionally for this, that this occasionally happens. And if we think about it, this is why we have an ethical code. We've gone through these 2 ethical questions, both answers, at least when having a random population sample of people listening to this ethics CEU. So there may be some interfering factors there with who's listening to the ethics CEU and how they're feeling about their job and their work-life balance. But half of people are responding that occasionally this applies. So why should you care? Because you need to do your best work and recognize when you're unable to do so. It's kind of an extension of that previous point. And I think that reply that really hones in on it in responsible conduct of behavior analysts. So being able to recognize that your personal problems and conflicts may interfere with your effectiveness and refrain from providing services when their personal circumstances may compromise delivering services to the best of their abilities. It sounds like the 2 might have been a little switch, but both ethics. Next poll, is it important for you to operate with your client's best interest in mind? So it looks like so far, always, 100%. Oh, 1% said very frequently. Yeah, so it's 99% at always, 1% at very frequently. Maybe they have a justification, and I'm not hearing that obviously because they're not talking with me, but I'd hear them out. So why should you care, right? Because our clients are important. And so that's within our responsibility to our clients, having the responsibility to operate in the best interests of our clients. And if we can't see that, if we're too run down to determine that we're not doing our best, our clients are the people that are going to suffer. I listened to a podcast, I think it was yesterday or the day before, so I don't know if this is true. But it said, it gave me the statistic that if you were running on 6 hours of sleep a night for 2 weeks straight, so you're sleeping every night, but only 6 hours, and for 2 weeks, that it's the equivalent of like walking around legally drunk. I don't know if that's true, right? It sounds kind of crazy and maybe makes a little bit of us scared right now. But I just share that with you because we know sleep is important, and we know taking care of ourselves is important because that directly affects what we do in our lives, how we operate with our clients, but sometimes we let ourselves take the back burner and don't take care of ourselves. Okay, have you ever felt like there's too much on your plate? I'd like to meet the behavior analyst that says never, because I want to know what they're doing. So it looks like about 63% at very frequently, 28% at occasionally, 9% at always, and just 1% at rarely. So the largest group is in very frequently at 63%, right? And I feel that too, right? Like I'm somebody who I work full time and I'm in a doctoral program and I teach yoga and I'm raising a cat. Like I have a lot of responsibilities on my plate. And we as behavior analysts, we do that. So why should you care? Because you need to be able to recognize and change when you are not effective. And I think that relates to behavior analysts as supervisors. Behavior analysts only take on a volume of supervisory activity that's commensurate with their ability to be effective. And that's for our clients and for our supervisees, right? Those are the future behavior analysts. I think we have a responsibility to model for those people that are later gonna walk in our shoes, ethical and self-care behavior and how this career can be one that is sustainable and not one that you're burnt out at 35 and can't do it anymore. Why should you care? Whole, have you ever felt like your workplace encourages a culture of being overworked? And I've already told you that I think we live in a society that like idolizes being super busy, not sleeping. So it would be strange to see this not mirrored in our community specifically. So the polls look like right now, 14% at always, 56% at very frequently, 23% at occasionally, 4% at rarely, and 2% at never. So the largest group is very frequently at 55%. So I'm going to assert to you that culture really doesn't work, and that culture doesn't support having a long career and doing your best work. And I don't know that I really realized that this point was in there in the ethical code, that we have a responsibility to promote an ethical culture. So behavioralists promote an ethical culture in their work environments and make others aware of this code. And I think an ethical culture is one that does promote actually taking care of yourself, because that has a trickle-down effect to your work with your supervisees, with your clients, all aspects of your life. So one more discussion, it'll be quicker, it's 5 minutes. If you're alone and you're at home, I want you to actually write it down. I know it sounds silly, but writing it down I think makes a difference and makes it kind of like sink in more for you. But in your groups or with a partner, you can share personal experiences or hypotheticals if it feels really uncomfortable for you, like maybe this could happen. But 5 minutes just to talk about, has your work ever adversely affected your life? All right, so we're gonna head back into the next portion of this, which is kind of the more exciting part. We were laying a foundation, we were diving into ethics, which is great to get our CE, but in ethics, but it's not usually quite as fun as looking at the research. So there's lots of it out there. And the first study that I'm going to share with you is an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program. There's a lot of that out there. If you look for MBSR, you're going to see lots of different applications of it. This particular study was the first randomized control trial comparing mindfulness-based stress reduction to an active control for generalized anxiety disorder. So it was a really important study. But before we talk about the results of this study, there is, again, lots of research in this like 8-week application of this that show that it improves mood, right? It improves cognitive performance, associated with improvements in immune system functioning. People are less stressed and they have better emotional regulation. So that was already shown. And these programs generally are based on teaching participants to react non-judgmentally to stressful events by focusing on automatic and dynamic stimuli. Breathing. Over there. This particular study did see a reduction in symptoms associated with generalized anxiety disorder. So that's a lot of the stuff that I talked to you about at the very beginning, right? Physiologically, what happens emotionally within your thoughts, and also improves stress reactivity and coping measures. And it's easy to gloss over these results, and no, this isn't a behavior analytics study, but think about your own life, and would it be better to have improved stress reactivity and coping mechanisms, right? Like, yes, at least for myself. This second study that I found was a brief meditation training. So he looked at 4 days versus 8 weeks. There's tons of research out there to support that, yes, people can do this 8-week training in mindfulness and things are gonna be great, but can we do it condensed and more quickly? This study, they did have a control, and the control participants read The Hobbit, or they listened to The Hobbit on a compact disc, and they were told just to silence their cell phones and electronics and sit quietly and just listen to their audiobook, and both interventions were effective in improving mood. So the people who just listened to a book were also happier. But the mindfulness and meditation training, it found reduced fatigue and anxiety, increased mindfulness, and significantly improved visual-spatial processing, working memory, sustained attention, and executive functioning. I hope I didn't miss a survey I wanted you guys to do. I'll go back in a moment. But that last bullet point, like, wow, there's a huge amount of social validity to those things, right? And a lot of these studies measure a lot of those things through different tests and different surveys. Let me go back real quick to make sure I didn't miss one. I don't think so. Oh, wait. Yeah. Okay, so to give you guys a little bit of understanding of what this mindfulness meditation training was in this study, I'm gonna have you do it. This is me reading their procedures and protocols and interpreting what I think maybe they did. So to these researchers, I'm sorry if I've mischaracterized it, but this is what I think it looks like. So you guys, we are going to engage in a meditation. So just sit comfortably in your chair, feet on the floor if you can, and close your eyes. And if you're at home, same thing. So first, just relax with your eyes closed and simply focus on your breath. And that breath that is occurring right at the tip of your nose. So feeling the air go in your nostrils and out. And if a random thought comes up, passively notice it, acknowledge it, but then let it go. And do that by bringing your attention back to those physical sensations of your breath. Now, take it deeper with your eyes still closed. Focus on the sensation of the air going up in your nostrils, down your throat, into your lungs, and expanding in your rib cage, maybe your back body. And feel that breath as it travels all the way in and as it gently travels out. No need to manipulate your breath, just breathe naturally. If any sensation or thought arises in your body, that's okay, but return your attention to your breath. And here, just take 5 more breaths at your own pace, unhurried, gentle, easy. When you finish those breaths, you can gently begin to open your eyes. So maybe that's what their procedures looked like. And maybe that feels really good for you, or maybe it doesn't, right? And if it doesn't, that's okay, because I still know what is true about mindfulness and meditation, that it's the prolonged effects that are much more impactful from my own personal practice, but then also from looking at these research studies. So what I imagine from reading their procedures is what they did with the participants was a lot of that. And what I took you through was kind of what they did on day 1, days 2, and days 3, and tried to do it one after the other. But now let's look at some more studies. So in the workplace, this was a specific study that was trying to provided training to their employees to reduce burnout. And they used mindfulness, meditation, and several other physical, cognitive, philosophical, and self-care activities. So this was a public agency providing comprehensive mental health and substance abuse services somewhere in the Midwest, so a large Midwestern city. And participants were asked to complete a baseline survey at registration and then a second baseline survey the morning of the training session. And there were several measures that they looked at during this. There was a particular burnout inventory, a job satisfaction inventory, and the training itself was a 1-day workshop. So again, this was somebody trying to look at it, yeah, 8 weeks is great, but can we even pack it, not just 4 days, into 1 day, 6 hours? And the training included burnout prevention principles, experiential exercises, and skill building in 6 major areas. And I won't go into all of those. So, but noted, this study, there were significant decreases in emotional exhaustion and depersonalization, and they deemed that 2 huge components of burnout. And there were small but significant increases in positive views towards consumers. And this visual might help you out a little bit. It's weird for us as behavior analysts to look at research like this, but what you want to look at is the effect size all the way over, and you probably can't see that. Emotional exhaustion, the effect size was 0.65 and depersonalization was 0.43. So those were the bigger effect sizes. This study, though, did not have a control. So that limits our ability to draw just firm conclusions from the specific research. But again, think about this and apply it to your own life. If I could go to a workshop 6 hours and then feel less exhausted and feel less of the components of burnout, like that would be great. This was another study that looked at in the workplace. It was a randomized control study that assessed a 5-week mindfulness training. So still trying to abbreviate this 8-week study. And this was for parents and educators for children with special needs. So there were 32 parents and 38 educators. And the children with autism, they weren't specifically focused on in this study, but they did vary in severity level in their symptoms. So how it worked was the parents and the educators were randomly assigned by a computer generator to be in one group or the other group. One group got this treatment over the summer, the other group got it in the fall, so that's how they had their control. Their control was their wait list. And what they saw was a significant reduction in stress and anxiety, increased mindfulness, self-compassion, personal growth at program completion, and at 2-month follow-up, which is crazy. And this graphic shows you a little bit of their curriculum and what they worked on. So super small, but what we're gonna do is 2 of the surveys that they use, you guys have in your handouts. So I'm actually gonna have you complete them. So one is the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire, where you're gonna rate things from 1 to 5, 1 being not true at all, 5 being completely true. And then that is about 39 questions that you're gonna just quickly and do it like first instinct, right? Like don't think about it too much, just whatever you think from 1 to 5, put it down. And the second one is the perceived stress score, where you also look at from 0 to very often. So that's gonna be the first first 3 full pages of your packet that you're just gonna complete right now to get a sense for what this study did and looked at. The last page that you guys should be looking at is there gives you for the perceived stress, they give you a scale and like how to interpret the results. You can go read that page if you want to start interpreting, and that's fine. If not, that's okay too. So just about another minute to finish up, but this isn't meant to be a tool to like judge yourself and be like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. It's just meant to like understand these research studies, and maybe it's a spark to be like, maybe I should try some of these practices. All right, guys, I'm gonna bring you back now. If you haven't finished, that's okay. We'll have a few more times that you can do this if you'd like. And again, you don't need to do all of the surveys. It's just the first mainly 2, the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire and the perceived stress scale. But those are for you to keep as well. So if it's something that you want to look at or continue doing, that's totally fine. So moving on, there was also a lot of really good research about applying this to parents with children with disabilities, because obviously that's a population that has well documented like high psychological distress because of just what they're dealing with in their daily life. So this was a study of 28 parents where they completed a questionnaire about their child's behavior problems, about parental stress, about depressive and anxiety symptoms, mindful parenting, along with some open-ended questions. Yeah, you can see the whole thing right now, right? And what they looked at with mindful parenting, there were these 5 aspects to it. So listening with full attention, non-judgmental acceptance of self and child, emotional awareness of self and child, self-regulation in the parenting relationship, and compassion for self and child. And what they found was pretty cool, because what we know is that, so higher levels of mindful parenting were related to lower levels of depressive symptoms and of stress. And I'll give you examples of some of these 5 things right here. So for listening, it was, I find myself listening to my child with one ear because I'm busy doing or thinking about something else at the same time. For number 2, it's when things I try to do as a parent do not work out, I can accept them and just move on. 3, it's easy for me to tell when my child is worried about something. 4 is when I'm upset with my child, I notice how I'm feeling before I take action. And then 5 is when I do something as a parent that I regret, I try to give myself a break. And when I look at that study and I read those things, or as you hear those things about that they measured or looked at using these subjective rating scales, like I think about the families that I work with and think about how I would want them to have some of these qualities, right? I would want them to give themselves a break. I would want them to show themselves some more compassion. Okay, Moving on, another study for parents of children with disabilities. This was 67 mothers of children with autism, and they looked at 87 mothers of children without autism. So it was both populations. And this trait mindfulness was significantly associated with decreased levels of stress in mothers and those with ASD and those without, right? So this provides some implications for us, even if you just like have a child. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So I also have another survey for you guys for this study to understand what they meant about for trait mindfulness. But the main takeaway from this is that the results suggest that interventions to promote mindfulness, they could be helpful for reducing parenting stress for both populations, right? There's something about it that is working for just mothers in general. And the one that you'll want to look at for this one is the mindful attention and awareness scale. So you probably haven't gotten to that one quite yet, or hopefully not. So that's the one, the MAAS, that's the one that looks like this. If you guys could just complete that. And this one, if you actually do want to score yourself, the scoring is pretty simple. You just add them all up together and find an average. That one's pretty short, so I'll bring you guys back now. So that's an example of what this study looked like at one of their measurement tools of trait mindfulness. So also continuing to look at parents of children with disabilities, they looked at self-compassion, and they defined that as being kind to oneself in times of difficulty, recognizing the shared nature of human suffering and being aware of negative thoughts and emotions. And I want to provide you guys with a definition that I've come up with of self-compassion. Some of it's from Diller and Littall. You can look them up if you want to. There's actually a direct quote for it in my definition, but it's what I think we as behavior analysts maybe could imagine that self-compassion is. It's compassion, compassion rather, is understanding that there are many environmental variables that contribute to behavior. And knowing that if given that same history and placed in that same situation, any individual would likely respond the same way. I think that's a really cool way to think about it. And also it brings in a lot of the stuff that we know as behavior analysts. So I'm going to repeat that just one more time, because as I look at the definition and try to apply it to my own life, it changes some of my interactions. Compassion is understanding that there are many environmental variables that contribute to behavior, and knowing that if given the same history and placed in the same situation, any individual would likely respond the same way. And that was more likely from the viewpoint of radical behaviorism. So this one found that self-compassion predicts parental well-being over and above the effects of child symptom severity, which is pretty huge, because that's usually what we know is that, well, the more severe this child's symptoms are, that's going to reflect in the parental stress. So it was really cool that when we give them this other tool, something changes. It contained six subscales that they were looking at. So there was self-kindness. I try to be kind towards myself. Self-judgment. I'm disapproving and judgmental about my own flaws. Isolation. When I think about my inadequacies, it tends to make me feel more separate and cut out from the rest of the world. Mindfulness. And then over-identification. When I'm feeling down, I tend to obsess and fixate over everything that's going wrong. So that's what they looked at. And again, this is the last survey that I have for you guys, but I also have the self-compassion survey. It's pretty long. So give it a try, look at some of it, and it shows you some of the things that they were trying to measure, and it can give you an idea of some of the things that they were probably trying to increase. As far as what the scores mean, it's individual to each one of the scores. So for some of them, they actually give you like a scoring guide to a higher to a lower. So I can't give you just a blanket statement for what it means. Yeah. What I would do if you want to find out more about it, take that particular study that it actually correlates to, then to determine. So for example, this one that we're looking at right now, I'm disapproving and judgmental about all of my flaws and inadequacies. If you're at almost always, right? So how much self-compassion do you have for yourself? Less, right? So sometimes it's going to mean the opposite. Sometimes it means when it is more, you have more.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh. the graph is there. I can't have a big moment for this graph. So I'll start. Dr. Stein has done lots of really great research in this field, and it's exciting to me because it's actually using behavior analytic methodology. You can see the graph, so I'll just give you all of the bullet points. He had a 12-week mindful parenting program. And it was with mothers with children with autism, and they were given no instructions about how to respond to their child's problem behavior, no behavior management techniques, nothing. They were told, just keep doing whatever you're doing as far as that. And then they engaged in this 12-week mindful parenting program that focused on knowing your mind, focused attention on arousal states, being in the present moment, the beginner's mind, being with your child, non-judgmental acceptance. It had a bunch of different components to what this 12-week program was. And they did look at both objective and subjective measures. But what you're seeing here in this graph, it is numbers of aggressive behaviors. So this is for the dyad 1, mother and child, dyad 2, mother and child. You have baseline, what the numbers of aggressive behaviors of the children were in baseline, what they were during the mindfulness training. And then lastly, the mindfulness training is done. These people are just continuing to collect data on the number of aggressive behaviors of their children and continuing to engage in these mindfulness practices. So as we look at that graph, it's pretty incredible. And what this demonstrates is this like spillover effects of a mindfulness training, right? Like the kids, didn't actually intervene on them at all, you could say, right? All they did was taught the mothers mindfulness techniques, which then did something to the aggressive behaviors of the children. Yeah.
I don't know, do you know if it was the researchers who were taking the aggression data or the parents who were reporting?
Oh, so a question was asked is if it was the researchers taking aggression data or the people recording or the parents. I don't remember. I would guess it has to be the parents though, because it's per day, right? So how often is it happening? A researcher wouldn't be there all day. But that's a good way. And I like that you guys are like looking at these graphs and digesting this information. So again, parents mindful parenting decrease their child's aggression, noncompliance, self-injury, and also in their subjective measures, parents felt better, right? They felt better about their parenting skills and the social interactions that they were having with their child. And then also the children with disabilities, they also measured their positive and negative social interactions. That's a whole nother thing to go in and what that procedure looked like. But their social interactions between their siblings, you can see during baseline, mindfulness training, and mindfulness practice, there was also a marked difference. And this is the other two dyads of mother and child pairs.
Would have combined this with like functions of behavior also in regards to parent training?
Yeah.
That would be, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
following the function of bringing the mindfulness practice into it.
I think so too. And I mean, as far as like what exactly caused this effect, they even note in this research study, well, this study wasn't actually trying to say why, right? We were just trying to look at it. And that's another avenue to look at. This study focuses on acceptance and commitment therapy. So 3 mothers participated. There were 4 phases of it. There was baseline, there was training, there was post-training, and then there was follow-up. Training consisted of 6 90-minute one-to-one sessions of ACT, implemented, I think, by the first researcher. This just tells you also there was that post-training. So they gave them these 6 90 minutes, then they followed up with them. There was a little post-training that they had as well. And these are the things that they focused on. And you'll see the first thing is valuing. And in ACT, values can be defined as verbal statements that alter the degree to which consequences function as reinforcers or punishers, right? So verbal statements that alter the degree to which consequences function as reinforcers or punishers. So they taught them a lot about values. And their values exercises focused on rule following repertoires to increase engagement towards these more substantial long-term reinforcers. And a lot of what they did was they tried to reduce the control of previously established verbal rules and rule following behavior, again, towards these more long-term and substantial reinforcers. And this is like a quick 2-second spiel on ACT. If it doesn't feel like that sinks, it probably doesn't, because there's a lot to it. So what they measured, I really loved their measurement system because they still did it from a behavior analytic perspective. They looked at value-directed behaviors, which were things that they could actually observe. It was defined as any action resulting in tangible outcomes directly related to an individual parent-identified value. The topography changed based on the parent. So an example of a value-directed behavior, for one of these parents, was any example of both parents engaging in a leisure, social event, or family routine together with both children, right? So that's something that's actually, you can actually see happening, right? Two parents are there, both children are there, they're in a leisure activity. Enjoyment, maybe you're not, but they're there. So that's what they were looking to measure. Their dependent variable is the frequency of values-directed behaviors per day. So in baseline, they identified what they wanted their value-directed behavior to be, and then they still had a baseline where they weren't actually intervening. Then they had training, then they had post-training, and the coolest ones, I think, are the actual follow-ups, which they only had for 2 of the participants, but just how high their value-directed behaviors are after training and post-training. And you can see everybody showed increases in post-training. Okay, just a few more of these to go. This study looked at 6 mother-child ASD dyads. And it was a 2-step study. So first, the mothers were trained in mindfulness, and they were taught it to fluency, and then the mothers instructed their children in mindfulness. So kind of crazy. The children were from 8 to 15 years old. Yeah, and so the mothers actually attended that 8-week mindfulness training and then taught their children. Decreased problem behavior in children, which is pretty cool. These are some of the graphs on it. They're a little bit confusing to interpret. So P1 was before mindfulness training in the parents. P2 was after the parent mindfulness training, and then P3 is the child mindfulness training. So some of these, this is mindfulness, you'd want to see this go up. This is the perceived stress, which you guys took, you want to see this go down. And then this is quality of life, right? You'd want to see that moving up within the bar graphs. And then on top of that is also the aggressive behaviors of the children. This is Peter's aggressive behavior, Peter's thought problems, and Peter's rule-breaking behavior. So it's cool to see them on top of one another, that the parents in general, their mindfulness levels were increasing, their stress was doing much of a decrease, and quality of life was also increasing. Just some more of the graphs so you can see them for all of the participants. Yeah. So another one when implemented by parents, there was 3 adolescents with ASD and aggressive behavior. This was a multiple baseline design. And it used the Meditation on the Soles of the Feet program, which I'll go into more what that is, but there's a lot of research on it. And this procedure required these adolescents with autism to rapidly shift their attention from this aggressive triggering event to a neutral place on their body, which was the soles of their feet. And their target behaviors were physical aggression. This was also implemented by the parents. So it was 30-minute training sessions conducted by the mother for 5 days. And then once they'd learned the basics of it from the mother, then they were just giving a recording to continue practicing the same program by themselves. So not a lot of training out by the parents either. I think there's just one, yeah. So those were his graphs. They look kind of small, but you can see baseline levels of aggression, levels during the mindfulness training, and then their follow-up training is what I think is most amazing. That a follow-up, there is a total of 4, 3, and 3 aggressive acts per participant in 3 years, right? Down here, first it's at weeks, then we're talking about months. So it dramatically decreased their aggressive events. And sure, we can have arguments about how this wouldn't work with all people with autism. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it is a certain subset of people that this intervention would be effective and apply to. But nonetheless, pretty incredible behavior for decrease program here. And I think it's Important too, because right now when we're looking at individuals with autism, we are heavy on these behavioral and psychopharmacological treatments. So it's important to explore alternatives. This was another study done the same year, implemented by parents. This was individuals with Asperger's syndrome and moderate rates of aggression. These were just 15-minute daily training sessions with the mother. It lasted anywhere from 17 to 24 weeks, and it was that same program, that meditation on the soles of the feet program. And there we are. So for the 3 participants, you can see the number of aggressions in baseline, what it looked like during mindfulness practice, and then again, their follow-up. And notice the switch from weeks to months. So we're talking about follow-up of 0 aggressive acts in 4 years is what that displays. Okay, applications. So I'm gonna get you guys to meditate with me again, and I'm gonna do the soles of the feet procedure with you guys. And maybe it doesn't apply to you, maybe you don't have aggressive events that trigger you. That's okay, I want you to just, maybe you do. I want you to just take it in as like, this is what this procedure could be. And again, I have not had this procedure ever done on me, so I don't know if this 100% reflects what they did in the studies. So again, sorry to the researchers if it is a misrepresentation, but it is me reading their procedures to you. So wherever you're at, sit down and have your soles of the feet flat on the floor. And then close your eyes. And breathe naturally, do nothing. No manipulation of the breath, just continuing to breathe naturally. And then cast your mind back to an incident that made you very angry, a recent event that made you very angry, or even upset, and then stay with that anger. Whatever sensations, emotions are happening in your body, feel it. So you're feeling angry or upset, and these thoughts are flowing through your mind. Let them flow naturally without restriction. Not trying to pull them, stop them, let them flow. Now shift all of your attention fully to the soles of your feet. Slowly move your toes and feel your shoes covering your feet. Feel the texture of your socks, the curve of your arch, and the heels of your feet against the back of your shoes if you have them. If you don't have shoes on, feel the floor or the carpet with the soles of your feet, taking in every single sensation there, all your attention at the soles of your feet. Keep breathing naturally and focus on the soles of your feet until you feel calm. You can practice this mindfulness exercise until you can use it wherever you are, whenever an incident occurs that may otherwise lead you to being verbally or physically aggressive. And remember that once you're calm, you can walk away from the incident with a smile on your face because you controlled your anger. Alternatively, if you need to, you can respond to the incident or situation with a calm, clear mind without verbal threats or physical aggression. And you can open your eyes if you haven't already. That's just part of the procedure. And you can see how maybe somebody would stay in it longer for a certain period of time if they still needed to focus on that. But this application, there's a parallel directly to the stuff that I was telling you at the very beginning of the presentation about mindfulness. And I talked about, right, parasympathetic nervous system activation. That's that fight or flight. That's like, I'm gonna engage in a verbally or physically aggressive act. Could be, right? That could be a representation of it. And what this does is you're focusing on specific sensations in your body. And we know from a scientific perspective, like that's how you can, instead of being in SNS, engage this parasympathetic nervous system activation. And I think, as my own personal thought, that that's why this procedure can be effective, because it takes us from one state to another state. And maybe it didn't do anything for you, and that's okay too. Okay, this is actually my last slide, and I guess I talk quickly. This is how long it took me to get through it at my house, so it was true to practice. What to make of this? I want you guys to be on the lookout for behavior analytic research that's focused on mindfulness and meditation. So I want you to be somebody who is looking at the research, finding an article, reading it, listening to a podcast about it, and then bringing your analytic behavior analyst self to that and investigating it, right? And deciding for yourself if this is what you think is a practical and appropriate application of our science. And if it's not, maybe think about doing some research that is. I also want you guys to think about, if you're interested in exploring a personal practice of mindfulness and meditation, these are the two things that I would recommend for you. One, that's the book, Buddha's Brain. It is actually, yes, The Practical Neuroscience of Buddha's Brain, Happiness, Love, and Wisdom. So it's something for me that, you know, we're behavior analysts, we're scientists. Like, I wasn't willing to jump full force into a lot of this until I understood the basis of what's happening in your body and some of the neurological perspectives behind it that helped me get with some of the fuzzy, like, compassion and self-love stuff. So I would recommend you guys look at that. Second, Headspace. This is the app that I use to meditate. And it's really good. There's a lot of components of it that are actually free. You can get the beginner series, I think, completely for free and try. And if you're somebody who's at the Verbal Beginning Center, what I want to do is start like a mindfulness club. That sounds really lame, so that won't be the name. Meditation club. And what I want it to be is, I don't want to, I'm just going to be in a conference room every week, 1 or 2 times at specific times that you guys know about. And I'm going to bring my application and I'm just going to play it. And it'll be 5 minutes where we can sit, listen to it, develop a meditation practice. So there's no stress on me to do anything or even on participants. All you have to do is sit there, right? Because I think looking at all of this research, yeah, there are huge implications to what this research is doing. And I think that if the worst thing that happens is that you have 5 minutes where you're just sitting in your day, then that's not so bad. Yeah, so if you guys have any specific questions, I think I can take them. Yeah, hopefully I can answer them.
The people in the online have some questions. It might just be good to like repeat the question a little bit for the mic.
Yeah.
So one person had asked, would you say mindfulness is an emergent property that increases in duration?
Oh, I mean, I guess you could choose to think of it that way. Really what I feel comfortable saying about mindfulness is something that you need to practice. It's something that you need repeated exposure to. And even like when you take the Soles of the Feet program, you're doing that in optimum conditions at first, right? You're not doing it in that stressful situation. You're doing it and practicing it. And it reminds me so much of like discrete trial instruction, right? Like we ask somebody to practice it multiple times before we expect them to apply it into a new environment and generalize the skill. So you can think of it that way, but I think of it as something that you have to practice. Yeah.
And somebody else asked, going back to kind of the SNS slide that you had put up, is it possible that activation of the SNS is reinforcing? A person on a plane in the street camp might get reinforcement of attention. Does that play in at all? So what you were looking at there? Or?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. I did not think about it that way, but man, like we are such complex behaving organisms. Sure, yeah, like if you like the comfort and then you get reinforced by something different, yes, it would be unrealistic to think that there is just one contingency at play at any moment in time in an organism's life. So sure, I did not consider how those other things come into effect. And that kind of applies to a comment that was made earlier about, okay, this mindfulness training with parents, could we combine that with functions of behavior training? And I think that is where the sweet spot is. And I think that is something that makes us qualified to look at things like this as behavior analysts, because we understand other parts of the picture. Right. And we're going to measure it in a really clear way. Yeah. Better than some of these surveys, although they are good tools.
Someone had asked about the soles of the feet procedure. Is that a research alternative behavior for aggressive vocals?
not in what I mean, there is verbal aggression was part of it. Like, so sure, maybe. I would honestly look up the research of Dr. Stein. He has so much stuff out there. I think he presented at ABAI, not this year, but the year before. So his stuff is out there and readily available. And other researchers have done work on soles of the feet as well, though, not just him.
One person asked, as behavior analysts, how do you suggest we use these types of tools in practice, given their lack of supporting single subject design evidence for their use? The psychometric properties don't seem very strong for some of these, but I'm just wondering, how do you balance the need to stay true to the dimensions of behavior analysis while still incorporating some of these concepts? And I think it's specifically about the surveys, right? Yeah,
sure. So, well, maybe they asked this question earlier on the in the presentation. There was some single subject research design that we just looked at. So that's there. But I'm not telling you guys to go out and start doing this with your clients with autism. I'm presenting you research on it. And what I think you should do is a personal practice. If you want to get more familiar with this, do this for yourself, and then think about becoming competent in an area like this if this is somewhere where you want to go with your clinical practice, right? So we still have to abide by our ethical guidelines. We're not just going to jump right into something that you're not competent or that you even don't feel like is validated within the research yet. So it does come down to a personal, like, hey, I've looked at this, I think this is solid. But yeah, I assert you should do a personal practice of it and explore from there.
During this session, we got an influx of questions. I don't think that we'll be able to get all of them. A couple people are tossing out some other app ideas, like Insight Timer is another meditation app. One person commented about using the Mightier app for kids, which I guess is for managing anxiety and learn mindfulness skills. And she's heard really good things about that, so that was thrown out there. One person asked if you saw anything that accounted for the philosophical differences in Western mindfulness versus Eastern mindfulness.
That is a huge question that I am not prepared to answer. I mean, yeah, even if you think about it, do you think there are philosophical differences in Eastern and Western bodies of thought? Yeah, of course there are. Yeah, I'm not going to go to that whole question and start a philosophical debate.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's all of them. People are asking other questions, but I can feel more about getting these resources and everything like that.
Yeah.
So I'll just say two things, or just one thing. Thank you. That was amazing. And it was totally like outside of what we do on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of it is so applicable to us as individuals, and I'm so glad you mentioned practice. And we talked about doing this presentation around this time because Q3, Verbal Beginnings really wants to push self-care and how do we take care of ourselves so we can take care of the kids. So I think that you starting like your groups here can really lead to something, very helpful to us as individuals, where we have to really think about how to take care of ourselves and our minds and bodies and us as BCBA, and promote that down to therapists and our kids. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's something, I don't know the logistics of it, but like if it's something that we can also make I don't know if we can make Headspace available to people that are also working in home. Like if I just like turn it on, can they hear it? Like, are we allowed to do that? Like I'm not going to charge for it, obviously. So.
Yeah, or we can think about something that we can, do some remote like collaboration with in-home services as well, so that people out there, even if they're in their car, don't close your eyes. Don't do that. But there's ways to, you stop for 5 minutes before your next session and take a deep breath. Do a little meditation and then go in with a 15 mind.
Yeah, different perspective. Yeah. References, and the end. Okay. Thank you guys.